The first question I have is very simple, I think. So where are you from, and where were you born and raised?
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me here today. This is Latino Hispanic Heritage Month, so as an immigrant, child of an immigrant Italian American, I'm honored to be here with you all today. I am newly arrived in Philadelphia. I've lived here all of about a couple of months now, and I'll give you a riddle to start out. You might have heard this before. Some version of this. What's the difference between an immigrant construction worker and a university president? One generation. So my father came here in the early 1950s. A distant cousin sponsored him to come from Italy. And this was the American dream, that he would come to America where he could find work and build a family and hopefully have his children have opportunities he didn't have. So neither one of my parents even went to high school, not because they couldn't handle the academics, but because their family needed them to go out to work. And so my whole sort of focus, I've been in school since I left school, it has been, how do I pay it forward to the next generation? Because that's the opportunities I got.
Gotcha. So how would you describe, growing up in that as the child of immigrants? How would you sort of describe, your household, the early life of that?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Brooklyn. In a neighborhood where there was probably 40 kids on a block, and we felt very safe and very secure. I went to Catholic grammar school, public high school, so it was in that transition from a small Catholic environment to a large public high school. At the time I was there, we were 6,000 at the high school, and my graduating class was 1,500. And students were bussed in from all over Brooklyn to attend that school. So that was really when my sort of eyes opened, because in terms of being able to be with lots of different kinds of kids from different parts of Brooklyn who didn't necessarily look like me or speak like me. And when you're a child of an immigrant, there's, especially in the 60s when I was growing up, I think there was even less tolerance for people who didn't speak the language. I can remember my father asking me, go to the bank with me, go to the store with me, because he'd be embarrassed someone would ask him a question and he couldn't answer properly in English. So there's a humility, but there's also a recognition that there's a lack of fairness sometimes, or maybe, social justice in the way we deal with each other. Right, and learning sort of and appreciating when people are kind to each other, regardless of whether or not they speak perfect English, and any other thing that may be different about them is really important.
How did your parents play any role in I guess, in what did school mean for them, for you?
Right, so thank you, and that's a really good question, because I think that matters a lot. I was fortunate enough to be in a family where my parents really knew that education was important, and for my brother and I. And that was maybe a little different some of the other families and my friends that were on my block, let's say. Some of those, my friends were told, go to Wall Street, you don't need to go to college, go find a husband, be a secretary and find a husband. So and I was always a good student, so that helped. I was a strong student. So, when you're in honors classes, people just pay more attention to you compared to my brother, let's say, who was an average student. And I could see the difference in even how much care and direction he got about going to school versus people just paid more attention because I was a straight A student, right? So what you learn is that, well, for me, I loved school. Like as a grammar school kid, we go home and play school, right? So I aspired to be a secondary school teacher. To be a high school teacher in my family was aspirational. And my parents supported me in doing that. So that was really important. Once they said, yes, if you give me a go to college, they didn't know any difference, right? I had to fill out the forms and they would sign them for me, right? If I went to a community college or an Ivy League college, they wouldn't have known the difference, right? And so even for me, I had to learn along the way what's the difference between all these different kinds of schools and how much they cost and how do you apply for financial aid. And And again, I had to rely on others to help me do that because certainly my parents weren't going to be able to help me fill out those forms.
And I know you went, so you went from Brooklyn to Arizona.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
What was that like?
It was a very big deal. So first of all, my father really didn't want me to go away to school. So I went locally my first year and I commuted, and that was really a struggle. And then I was fortunate enough that I could apply for financial aid and scholarships, and because I was a good student and we were a working class family, I applied for all sorts of financial aid. So I didn't have to ask my parents to help pay for me to go to Arizona. I had family in Phoenix. So the one thing that helped my parents get their head around me being that far away was that there was family nearby. For me as a kid from Brooklyn to go to Tucson, Arizona in the 70s was an eye-opener. You know, you don't know what it means to live in a state that's not democratic, to have a different kind of orientation and population. The food was different. People, you know, just culture was different. So I always say it's good because it makes you, sort of forces you to feel like the other and learn how to assimilate.
Gotcha. So track for me kind of your college experience there to graduating with your bachelor's and then getting your MBA at Fordham. So track kind of that journey for me.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, right? So I was a home economics, or family and consumer science is the more proper name for the study, right? I loved food preparation. I loved nutrition. I loved clothing design. To me, it was like to get to teach that stuff and help people develop basic life skills was just so cool. And so I was very active in the associations, and so I got to speak a lot and be a student organizer while I was in college. I also always worked in the financial aid office. That was my work-study job. So without knowing, I always tease kids today, and I say, be careful if you start out in a financial aid office, because that may end up being your job, even though you don't know it. So when I got out of college in '79, there was an economic crisis in New York City. I wanted to go home, be near my family and friends. No teaching jobs. You couldn't get in to teaching. And there was an entry-level position at Fordham for a financial aid counselor. And since I had spent so much time in financial aid offices, and I myself was on financial aid, I knew the ropes, at least the entry level, right? And that's how I started. And I realized, wow, so I can help kids go to school, help them get financial aid. And then there was all of the sort of policy stuff. And I found I had an interest in sort of learning more about the rules and regulations. And I was okay being in an office and not in a classroom. And once I realized I've got to go to my first professional conference and realized, like, oh, this is a whole profession. There are people all over the country who do this work, and you know, you can rely on a network of colleagues. I didn't know anything about this. I sort of opened my eyes to higher ed administration and realized I kind of had a knack for it. I liked it, but I better get an MBA because I really have no background in business. I don't know accounting. I never took management classes. Again, I thought I was going to be a teacher. I could write up a mean lesson plan, but that didn't necessarily help where I was going. And so that's how I ended up getting my MBA. It was the early 80s, so it was real rah-rah days in New York City. I could have just jumped on a subway, gone down to Wall Street, and I had a degree in finance. I could have joined a Wall Street firm. But again, my heart was in education. I said, I don't want to worry about wealthy people's money. I want to help people go to school and be in a school environment. And that's how I stayed in. I ended up sort of working my way up in financial aid administration over a course of about 6 years in the New York City area. You got your
MBA, and then kind of track for me your journey up the ladder of higher ed administration from that point.
So one of the things I want within this frame of this story is this advice we get about, is it good to change jobs every few years or is it not as a young professional? Because I'm one of those young professionals. I was changing jobs every 3 years. So within the first 8 years outside of college, I worked at 3 different places, right? I went from Fordham University as an assistant director to St. Francis College in Brooklyn as a director. I was 25 years old when I was hired to be the director. Everyone in the office was older than me that reported to me. All my peers across the institution were older than me. So you learn pretty quickly, sort of, I don't know if intuitively you just know this. I don't know that anyone really mentored me, but it's sort of, what skill sets do you need in order to establish yourself as a professional? And financial aid is a lot of rules and regulations. And from the very beginning, I thought it was really important for me that I know the rules and regulations so that I could do my work well. And then from that, you care about people, you have integrity, you're willing to step up and take on more responsibility. Those are the things I think early on that led me to pretty quick rise. The other thing I want to remind everyone is I was in New York City, which much like Philadelphia, you could take jobs and just take a different subway to work in the morning, right? You're not living in an area where schools are seldom and far apart, and you're literally moving you and your family to go to a different school. So that helps too, right? So I moved up pretty quickly, and then within 6 years, I was, an executive director. And I kind of hit a wall. I was in my late 20s, and I said, I really want to teach. I miss the classroom. That's what I got into this for. So even though I had the MBA in finance, I still wanted to get back into the classroom. So I was lucky I started as an adjunct at St. John's University. They asked me to teach management courses and econ courses. And from being their adjunct, they asked me to join them full time. And so I got to teach at St. John's for 10 years. So, and that's when I started my family as well. So I have 2 sons. And so, so I felt pretty fortunate that I got to be on faculty. And they actually invited me to be there before I got my doctorate. So the craziness was I ended up stepping down from my full-time position to help raise my children and also to pursue my doctorate. So there's nothing linear about any of this, right? And I think this is life, right? Yeah. You kind of figure it out as you go along, right? I was in my early 30s. We wanted to start a family. Oh my God, I'm teaching a 5-4 loan. I need to start a doctorate and I'm starting a family. All right, this is not possible. Like, how are we going to redo this? The other thing I always tell people is it helps when you have a supportive environment. I'm not a superwoman. I did not get to teach and pursue a PhD at Columbia University and raise my children by myself. I had a supportive husband. We had 2 sets of grandparents who loved my sons and wanted nothing more than help us raise them. So I would say 6 people raised my children, and I think they're better for it, and it certainly allowed me to do some things I otherwise wouldn't have been able to do.
Gotcha. So, you got your doctorate, and then you became, and there's probably stuff in between here, but then you became an associate provost at Lehman College.
Very good. Good homework.
I tried. And then after that, you went to Hunter College, Loyola Marymount, yeah, and then Felician, and that Felician was like kind of your big leadership area. But tell me, if possible, and you can tell me as much or as little as you want, between Lehman and Felician. Tell me that whole thing.
So what happened was when I was finishing up my PhD, and again, I was an adult. I finished at 43. I had 2 children in elementary school. So I wasn't in a position, we lived in Manhattan, I wasn't in a position where I could just take, an entry-level tenure-track faculty appointment anywhere in the country where one happened to open. So I had to be realistic about what my options would be. When I first was finishing up my PhD, I actually went to NYU, and I was a policy researcher was my title, and we were looking at an international policy study related to higher ed policy. And I always thought I'd be a researcher, right? I thought that'd be really cool, until I did it for about a year and was going out of my mind, because I realized I'm in a room by myself, so I get to write a paper, present at a conference, say I was published, big deal. Whose life am I impacting? What's, at the end of the day, what does all of this really matter in my work, right? What difference am I making? And and I loved NYU, and it was great being in this, living and working in the city, but I knew that that wasn't quite right for me. And again, you develop a network of professional friends, and people kept calling me and say, what are you doing? Why didn't you get back into administration? You've got all this good experience, you should. And so the position at Lehman was a brand new position. I thought it was interesting. I had a good skill set. I went up and I met Ricardo Fernandez, who was the president. And I was intrigued by the school. I really cared about the mission. I thought the role was really interesting because it was bringing together a whole bunch of departments that had never worked together before. So it was about 120 people I was going to supervise, and schools I care about, right? CUNY, I mean, I grew up around CUNY. My brother and my sister-in-law, you know, a bunch of us kind of had some sort of CUNY in our background. So the idea that I could be at a school that was 75% minority serving, most of the kids are low income and first gen like I was, like, yes, yes, let me see if I can make a difference in a school like that. And so that started, you know, this sort of full-time sort of professional track where I was senior leadership, and I got to sit in on cabinet meetings and board meetings, and I realized I really liked that work. I liked trying to help figure things out, make things better for the students and the faculty and the staff, and how do we advance together.
How was your experience how would you describe your experience at Felician?
At Felician, it was very exciting for me. So right along the way, first I was at Lehman, like I was an assistant provost, then Hunter, which is in the CUNY system. Folks there got to know me and they asked if I would come in and help them, and I worked with them for a couple of years. The big move for our family, because I was raising my sons in Manhattan, my husband worked in the city, was this opportunity to go out to LA. So that was another one of those other experiences, right? My husband never lived outside of New York City. My sons were in schools in New York City. It was like, I'm gonna go to LA, right? So it was like a big deal. So we did, and actually my oldest son was starting at University of Pennsylvania, and he's an English major, like you. He is a creative writing major. His first book just came out. So the line was, Zach went to Penn and Mom went to LMU. So we tried it out for a year to make sure I would like it, and then my husband came out and my younger son ended up going to Loyola Marymount. And that was a great experience, again, because it was just so different for me, right? It was a very different culture, and again, I had to figure out I'm the other out here. You know, of course, you always hear the teasing about the Brooklyn and the New York accent, and you know, people, you know, how do you work in that environment? It's culturally different. It's diverse in a different way than the New York City area. And what I was familiar with diversity, it was a different kind of diversity. And I had to get used to that. And, you know, again, feel like the outsider and feel like the other and trying to figure out how to negotiate. It was a great experience. It really was. Culturally, my husband and I really missed the East Coast. We missed our family, our friends. It's just different. To this day, my sons still live in LA, so we have one foot in LA and one foot on the East Coast. When I had the opportunity, again, and people always say I didn't plan to be president, it's true. You kind of like these things evolve as you develop skills and you develop networks. People start saying to you, well, did you ever think about, you know, you've developed enough of skill, you've been in the classroom, you've been doing all these different administrative jobs, maybe you're ready now. And you get to go to conferences, and right, I mean, this doesn't happen by magic. This is, you know, lots of nurturing, lots of my mentors, making sure I went to particular conferences and got involved in certain networks. And you also have to be willing to step up as an individual, right? I was always sort of sure, tell me what could I do, what should I do next, right? And at Felician, so first presidency, part of the challenge was I followed someone who'd been there for 28 years. So a sister, Felicians are Franciscan sisters. So I was following a 28-year president, first lay president. So first non-sister, non-nun at the institution. And I had seen that happen at Loyola Marymount when Father Lawton stepped down and the first lay leader took over there. And there's a whole body of literature about what it's like for first lay leaders at organizations that have been run by religious. I think we become much more intentional about talking about the mission and the values and the founding order when we're the first lay president, than even when they themselves are, because it's sort of like, oh, it's sister, it's father, they got this, right? So it's just assumed that they represent, and then all of a sudden, I would tease them, I'm like, would you give me a habit? It would make my wardrobe much easier. But I think you have to become very intentional to be clear about your understanding of the mission and the values, and that's your choice, is to be there because you absolutely support that. And it's just like, well, what does that mean in this day and age, and how do we provide the right programs and the right educational opportunities for the students we're called to serve now?
Right. So what brought you to Holy Family? What made you want to come to Holy Family?
Good question. Well, first I was familiar with Holy Family a little bit because Felicia and Holy Family play in the same athletic conference. Gotcha. So we're both D2 schools. We have 14 teams. Sports is a big part of, the campus culture. So, and I know Sister Maureen. But beyond that, you really don't know about a school, right? And I've never lived in Philly before. So for my husband and I, we love Philly. We would come every once in a while. Love the museums. The Rodin Museum is like one of my sacred spaces. And the culture, the food, all that good stuff that Philly has for you. But what really resonated was a couple of things. One is I understood the school and the mission and values, and I support that. And that had to be primary, right? Or else I could go to a different school. The second thing is the school has strong academics and was in a strong financial position. And then the third is seeing that there were opportunities where I could make a difference. And that was important to me. I want to be a value added wherever I go. So looking at where the school is now and being really excited about what good shape it is now, and where could we lead it under my presidency. So it was a combination of that. And, staying on the East Coast. I mean, that mattered too, right? This whole Northeast is sort of where we were looking to stay. Although I didn't know that I necessarily wanted to be in a city with 57 colleges and universities for competition. That wasn't maybe the easiest, but yeah, I love being in the city.
So talk about some of those, you said, some of the ways, what was important for you is you felt like you could make a difference in a certain amount of ways. So dive in a little bit and tell me some of the ways specifically that you thought you could make a difference coming to Holy Family.
Sure. So thank you. When I'm looking at, so what do you really care about? You're an academic institution, right? So really doing a revisit. One is they're redoing their general education curriculum, right? Which is a really important foundation for all students, right? And exciting things like, oh yes, we should require an internship for every student who's in arts and sciences and business, just the way the nurses always have built-in clinicals and teachers have built-in student teaching. We need to do that for our other majors. So that's exciting. Figuring, one of the challenges has been, because the school's physically in the Northeast and we have the campus in Newtown and Bucks County, how do we become more known and integrated into the fabric of the communities where we're in, and even better connected to Center City, Philly, right? And that to me is exciting because it's there, but now I get to be more intentional about it. And the other thing is, as the demographics and the diversity of the city keep shifting, what does that mean for Holy Family, and how do we ensure that we welcome every new emerging group and we reflect the populations that we serve? And so the whole idea of diversity and inclusion for me is a wonderful opportunity, because there are lots of different people in Philly, and so how do we all get to learn together and be educated and be in classrooms together, because that's how we learn from each other.
Yeah. What was it like coming to Holy Family during a pandemic? How did that factor into the decision?
Well, the first week I got here was July 12th. Everything was pretty good July 12th, right? So we talked about having an inauguration in the fall. Won't it be wonderful? Everybody needs a big party and a celebration, so won't it be wonderful? We get to install a new president and we'll have a great big party and celebrations and lectures, right? Yeah, right. Within a week, we had to completely change things. That was the weekend that everything kind of blew up, and the variant was really escalating hospitalizations. And then, okay, so by the next week, it was like new rules, let's go, here we go again. Every time we think we've got a plan, this pandemic hits us on the side of the head and says, ha ha, no way, now figure out what you're gonna do. So by that second week, the good news is we were in a much better place than we were a year ago, last summer. We didn't know what we were heading into. At least we had a lot more information. We knew if people were vaccinated and if they were masked, that we were much more likely to be able to be together inside. And so we quickly went to, let's mandate vaccinations of all of our students. Because of our mission and values, our whole idea is we're a holy family. We're responsible to each other. We care about our community. So how do we stay together? We get vaccinated, and when we're inside, we put a mask on. And so, you know, we're hoping that that keeps us together. You know, it was wonderful to have students on campus again after a year of sort of being vacuous, and everyone was home, so everyone was busy learning and doing everything on computers. But you can't ever beat being in community together and seeing, you know, the dining hall full and students interacting and students back in classes. I think it just reinforces for us or restores for us sort of our faith that as humans we really do like being together.
For sure. For sure. How would you say, I mean, and I feel like a lot of this you touched on a little bit in terms of having to always change up, having to, you know, be adaptable, I guess. So tell me about, I mean, even to this day, I would say, because of the Delta variant and who knows what other variant. But how would you say the experience has been to just sort of being adaptable to that sort of change, those sort of shifts throughout this pandemic for you?
I think like most people, it's been crazy. It's been crazy. We, you know, when you think about it, most of us in these positions like to like lead and control and plan things. And you had to learn, and it's exhausting because you have to do all these contingency theory and contingency planning. Like if this happens, this is what we're gonna have to do. If this happens, this is what so you spend a lot of time discarding plans, but you have to kind of think through all the scenarios for the just in cases, right? So right now, we know on any day, if things get really, really bad again, we could be all asked to go home and work remotely again. Well, are faculty prepared? Do they have the right equipment? Are students ready to switch on a dime again if we need to? We did it last year. We didn't. We've had strong enrollment. Our students have told us, you know, most of them would rather be in class, but they got through the year together. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned about, you know, how do we just keep doing this better if we have to, right? And I think in the long run, there's going to be a lot of lessons learned about what can we do as technology evolves? What are the possibilities for hybrid classroom environments, for hybrid work environments, right? Our students and our faculty and staff are saying, all right, well, you know, maybe all remote wasn't needed, but is there some sort of middle ground between remote and always in class? That may be a possibility. I would call them hybrid classes. So I just think it's going to be an exciting time once we get out of this and we could just sort of reflect on lessons learned and what can we take, what's the good stuff we could take with us that kind of forced us to learn.
Right. So you talked to me about things that you wanted to make a difference on. Coming in, and I just want to ask, in your time, you know, what would you say are some things that you would say have been successes, or things that you've been able to do, and what would you say things that need maybe a little bit more work, or you need more thought, or there's more learning that needs to be done?
So certainly, you know, we're all academics. I mean, we're an academic institution. So, you know, going back, looking at curriculum, what majors might we want to be developing that we're not offering now, or minors or certificates. There's so much opportunity now in higher ed to rethink how we do things, how we structure classes and degrees, and now there's all sorts of opportunities to think about how do we best serve adult students and returning students. Maybe it's certificates, maybe it's not. So that's really exciting, right? The other thing is that as the diversity of Philadelphia shifts, what does that mean for who we should be welcoming into our institution? So for example, I've always been highly committed to institutions that serve minority populations. As the Latino and Latinx population increases in Philadelphia, what does that mean for our obligation to make sure we welcome those students in, right? Back in 2000, ever since I started back at Lehman in 2001, I've always been working for either Hispanic serving institutions, emerging Hispanic institutions. So I really care about ensuring that Latinx students, Black students, all students, Asian, white, that we all really make sure that they have an opportunity to get to the best schools. And my role as at Holy Family is to make sure that that door feels open and welcoming, and that the success of those students is all equal. So what we worked really hard at Felician, and we'll be sure to at Holy Family as well, is student outcomes. So regardless of a student's socioeconomic, ethnic, racial background, once students are accepted to us, do we do everything we possibly can to support that student so that they succeed, right? And so that measures of success, when we look at these measures, that all of our students are succeeding at equal rates. And that's something that most of higher ed realizes we need to address.
Gotcha. So I think with that, we're on my last question. Because I feel like you touched on kind of what does the future at Holy Family hold. So I guess, what is your message to those prospective students? Those prospective students, the current students, alumni at Holy Family with you.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot. It's going to be 3 different messages, I know.
I know. Well, no, I mean, generally, what's the message? The message is that Holy Family is true to its mission and values of welcoming everyone, right? So, there's a saying that as Catholics, we don't teach others because they're Catholic, but because we're Catholic, right? So sometimes I think there's a misinterpretation of what it means to be founded by a Catholic religious order. The Catholic religious orders were founded in many ways to serve everyone. So by definition, they're not exclusive to just Catholics. Our alumni know that they've got solid education. So we're always saying to them, make sure that you speak about us, right? Many of our students, our alums, come back to do master's degree, to do a doctoral degree. And what I say to young people is, check us out. Check lots of schools out. Don't assume anything about where you think is going to be a good fit. Go to a large school, go to a small school, go to a city school, go to a rural school. Try and figure out where you think you're going to thrive, and then that's where should be your focus. The beauty about smaller schools is we have small classes. We don't have classes in auditoriums. I went to a big state school. I know what it's like to sit in an auditorium. Small schools just don't have that kind of critical scale to serve. So, classes for us are 12, 15, 25's a bigger class already. It's a different type of education. So what I would always encourage everyone is, revel in the fact that there's a diversity of educational opportunities, and recognize that Holy Family is a really special place for people that are a good fit, because you really do get that individual attention that maybe at a larger school you wouldn't get. So and you come away with such a solid base, right? You get a good education, and we can pay attention to all aspects of life. It doesn't really matter what your religious background is or if you don't have one, but we want you to think a little bit about philosophy and religion, right? We want you to think about that aspect of life wherever your background is. And that's important because, academics are very important. Our development as people are important. And the spiritual aspects of life is something that's like that third dimension, We want you to be healthy and physically fit. We want you to, feel like you've got a great education and a foundation to keep learning always, right? And then we want you to think about your spirituality and what's the bigger meaning of all of this life that we're in together.
Awesome. Well, that's all my questions. Thank you so much for your time.
And thank you.
I really appreciate it. I thought it was a good conversation.
Thank you. Saludos.
Yeah.